This is something that I've been debating for a while after realising that not only am I getting old, but also some of the heroes that I grew up with are almost close to retirement. I thought we could look at the so-called Big Four: Virat Kohli, Steve Smith, Kane Williamson and Joe Root. These players all debuted around 2008 to 2012 and are between 33 and 35 at time of recording. So maybe we'll see them get another 3-4 years, but most batsmen inevitably, unless they're all freaks, lose some ability as they get to the end of their careers. So let's take a look at the contenders to replace these guys. From the cricket I've watched, I think there is another crop of talented batsmen coming through from the same countries. All these players have somewhat established themselves as all format players and are starting to become the backbone of their respective sides. These players are Shubman Gill, Harry Brook, Rachin Ravindra and Cam Green. Whilst Green and Gill have played slightly more test cricket, what I'll do in this video is assess each and what they need to do. Please note there are honourable mentions to Jaiswal and Ollie Pope, however given their respective ages they don't fit nicely into the analysis. I think Pope has played slightly more matches and Jaiswal is newer in his career. I even think that Jaiswal may end up with a better record than some of the aforementioned, but check out my other video on Jaiswal to see why I think he's India's next superstar. The new Big Four have currently played between 13 and 44 innings in Test cricket, so for comparison, let's see how the old Big Four after 30 innings have done. As you can see, at the beginning of their career, they obviously had shown some promise, but there were still some doubts on fulfilling their potential. Even by their 50th innings, Kohli and Williamson still haven't reached a 50 plus average. However, with a long enough rope after 100 innings, they were all close to averaging 50, and after that, maintained there or thereabouts. Firstly, let's look at Harry Brook. He has been massively helped by the fact that England play heaps of Test cricket, and given their brand, they play on relatively flat tracks at home now, so he's had an unbelievable start to his Test career. I do think though that out of all the players, perhaps his technique is the one that may get tested the most, but you can't argue with the stats. 12 tests, over 1,000 runs at an average of 62. Wow. First, onto the positives. 1. He's an unbelievably clean striker of the ball, and on flat tracks can bully pace or spin. Secondly, he has proven it in the first class game. What's often labelled at some of the England players is that they come in and they are picked on potential rather than first class runs, e.g. Zach Crawley. With Harry Brook, this is unfair. In the 2022 County Championship season, he scored close to 1,000 runs at an average of 107, and he recently scored a blistering 100 for Yorkshire in the County Championship. 3. He's shown he can score big runs in Test matches. With 3 tons in Pakistan and 1 in New Zealand, it shows that he's cracked the Test match code and has the ability. Now onto why I think he might struggle and have some learning to do. 1. He goes relatively hard against the ball, similar to a Kevin Peterson. Whilst Kevin Peterson used to often play the ball under his eyes to avoid getting out, we have seen in the Ashes, especially against Pat Cummins, he didn't quite do this and get the volume of runs expected. So this may be a challenge against top bowlers, where he just needs to rein it in and pick the right times to attack. Secondly, he's unproven against spin. Whilst you may argue he scored 3 tons in Pakistan, let's be honest, they were absolute roads. He missed the tour of India, but I was interested to see if he could do it against the very best on spinning tracks. Now onto Shubman Gill, the Prince. He has been appointed Kohli's heir apparent for a few years now, but much like Kohli, while ODI successes come early, he struggled initially in Test cricket, still only averaging 35 from 25 matches. Whilst he seemed very comfortable on bouncy tracks versus Australia, with some runs there were some question marks against him on spin-friendly tracks and seamers. So let's look at the positives of his game. 1. If you watch Shubman for any length of time, it's quite clear he's an extremely talented player, and he has shown that on flat decks he can score big runs in ODIs. 2. Again, much like Brook, he has an excellent first-class record where he scored mountains of runs, averaging 55 when accounting for non-Test first-class matches. 3. Whilst initially having question marks about him against spin, he has certainly matured and become a better player, having evidenced this with superb hundreds against England and a 4th innings 50 on a deteriorating wicket in Ranchi. Now onto the negatives. There's one big negative I see with Gill. He pushes so hard at the ball. He's often looked good, but away from home early on against pace, he has nicked off a lot. We can just see his Test record in England to prove this. The problem for me is that he stays slightly leg side of the ball to access his strength around off stump, which can expose him to nicking off, and he doesn't leave as well as he could. However, he does seem to counteract challenges that come his way. In the first innings at Ranchi in the 4th Test, he was batting well and then got LBW to Bashir. In the second innings, he utilised his feet much more to eliminate this dismissal. Whilst a lot of players know their technical failings, to be able to fix them that quickly leads me to believe that he could do this with other parts of his game. It'll be interesting to see how he goes in 10 tests versus England and Australia over the next year. Thirdly, let's talk about Rachin Ravindra. It sounds a bit like Sachin, so you must be good, right? A talented player through the age groups for New Zealand, he really announced himself in the 2023 World Cup, scoring 300s. It seems like he's worked hard in his game, and you can just see how good he looked at the crease. If you compare this to when he was first in the Test team, it's a huge difference, where his initial forays into Test cricket were unspectacular. On the positives, he just looks so good. When you watch him bat, it's very simple. He stays still and plays late and gets on the front foot when it's full, or the back foot when it's back of a length. As shown by his 240 versus South Africa, admittedly it was a B team, but the pitch was green on day one and there was movement to be had. But if you were to critique him, he did struggle initially in Test cricket and nicked off a little bit, and whilst it looks like that's behind him, with being a star player for CSK in the IPL now, we'll need to see if he can maintain his form across all three formats. Additionally, he's unproven on spinning wickets, only scoring 53 runs in 4 innings in India on his debut series, and we need a bigger sample size to judge him on actual turners. Also, he's had good first class seasons, but overall only averages 40 from non-test first class matches, which is maybe part of him maturing as a player, but definitely not as impressive as other players on this list. Lastly, with New Zealand not playing that much Test cricket, we'll need to see if he can maintain that hunger for Test matches. Lastly, let's talk about Cameron Green. At 2 metres, bowling 140 kilometers an hour and being able to bat at 4, Cam Green is a special player. I think you know you're good when arguably the best Test match player of modern times opens, so you can bat at number 4. Again, he's had a stop-start beginning to his Test match career, and when he first came into the side, it felt like maybe you could bowl at him without too much of a counter punch. However, much like Ravindra, he has a pretty simple technique and plays the ball late and beside his body. He has shown he can score runs in seaming conditions with an excellent 100 versus New Zealand. Additionally, given his first class average of 58 in non-test first class matches, you feel like he should come good in Australia. However, given Australia plays so much cricket in England against the Duke's ball, I feel like he may have to do some work there in order to be successful against the seaming ball. But if his excellent 174 not out versus New Zealand is anything to go by, then hopefully he should figure out those conditions. Also, against spin, from what I've seen, he's very good. He uses his height well to get to the pitch of the ball and scored 100 in Ahmedabad, although it was a very, very flat pitch. I do think at number 4 though, he does need to dominate a bit more like he did in that New Zealand game towards the end, but he often seems to go into his bunker in difficult conditions rather than relying on his talent. I'm not saying he needs to bazball it, but slightly more intent would be useful. So to summarise, all these players are relatively young in their careers, and all bar Brook have gone through that period where they've had some struggle and seem a bit better for it. And I could sit here and argue who's the best, but much like the current Big Four, it's nuanced. Conditions, format and playing opportunities play such a big factor. The best thing to do is just hope that these players develop and we get another 10 years of watching world class batting. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, it'd really help out the channel. Thanks for watching.